Guys, do you really need algae in your tank? Yes, depending on which type of algae. And today we're going to talk about green dust algae, which covering your glass and the surface of your tank. And this algae is very important for high-end Corydina shrimps, and especially for little baby shrimps, because once they hatch, they rely on algae and biofilm, and they don't move too much. Most of the time they stay in one place, and if there is no food around them, they might starve to death. And it is very important you have some dust algae and biofilm growing in your tank. And today I'm going to tell you what steps you should follow to make sure you get enough algae growing in your tanks. Take a look at my tanks, guys, and most of them has this green dust algae growing on the side, and my shrimps absolutely love to hang around and graze on this algae. And you see that I didn't clean that glass for 1 week, and you can see that algae growing on the front of the glass. And this is a good sign, because you know this algae growing constantly, and your baby shrimps never run out of food, and you're always gonna find the baby shrimps on the glass enjoying this algae. And this is my red galaxy tank, and you can see some shrimps is hanging on the glass eating that tasty algae. The same for the next tank, my black pinto tank. And you can see some shrimps enjoying the algae as well here. I noticed that in some of my tanks I have more dust algae on the glass than in another tank. Look at this tank, guys. It has a lots of algae everywhere, yeah. But this tank has not too much, and this one has not too much. And you know why, guys? Because I noticed that if you keep lots of floating plants and lots of plants like mosses in general inside your tank, your algae might not growing as good as in another tank which has no floating plants, because this tank has no floating plants and it's not much moss, because I just did a haircut and cut the moss. So we have lots of algae here, and the reason for that is that floating plants are blocking a lot of light which does algae needed to grow, and floating plants and plants in general competing with the algae and using some nitrates and other minerals in the water which normally used by green dust algae. So the more floating plants and normal plants you have in the tank, the less algae on the glass you're gonna have. And take a look at this little tank. You can see lots of shrimps hanging on the glass eating that tasty yummy biofilm and algae. And here's my galaxy tank. And you can see some galaxy shrimps hanging on the glass as well, and they love eating this algae as well in this tank. There's not too many algae here because there's quite a lot of shrimps, and they eat this algae quite fast. I think I need to remove the remaining of the floating plants to make sure my algae growing faster. And take a look at this baby here and here on the glass, and there's a lot of algae in this tank as well. And this is kind of like unlimited food for shrimps, and you basically don't need to feed them very often, because if you don't feed them they always find something to eat, and if it's little babies in this tank, they always got unlimited amount of food around them. And if you look closely, you should find a lot of copepods roaming around and enjoying this dust algae. And this is a very good sign, because these little creatures has the same diet as the shrimps, and they eat the same biofilm and dust algae. If you have lots of these creatures, that means they have lots of available food around, and that means that your baby shrimp's gonna have lots of algae and biofilm around and not gonna starve to death. So this is very good sign of well-established tank. So don't mistake these creatures with seed shrimps. The seed shrimps are most of the time the sign of overfeeding, and this is not what you want to see. And what you want to see is these little copepods and not the seed shrimps. Guys, now I'm going to tell you what you need to do to make sure you have plenty of that algae in your tanks. And guys, take a look at this tank. This tank is 6 weeks into the cycle. So once you start cycling your tank, make sure you do everything right and your algae start to grow in the beginning, and it will continue to grow for the rest of the time, providing your shrimps with plenty of food. And what you need to do to make sure your algae start to grow nicely in the beginning is, first thing is to choose the right soil. Because active soil is designed for planted tank and it contains a lot of fertilizers and minerals and is great for algae to grow. Also, you need to choose a good bacterial powder which helps the biofilm and algae to grow, and you need to start your cycle with this bacterial powder and continue dosing this bacterial powder for the rest of the life of the tank. And I normally dosing it once a week, and this is mostly for feeding bacteria in the tank. And the last thing, of course, you need a good light. I normally use just a standard LED strip light on top of my tanks. It doesn't need to be something like LED light, it could be a normal light, it just needs to be enough light for the algae to grow. And I would suggest to keep your lights on for at least 12 hours a day, and that should be enough for algae to grow. So guys, as I mentioned before, these two tanks, they don't have much of the dust algae growing inside, and that's mostly because we have lots of floating plants on top of the surface of the water. So let's fix it and remove all the floating plants. And as you can see, this flame moss is overgrowing these tanks, so let's remove most of this and do the haircut and tidy up these tanks. And as always guys, don't forget to wash your hands before you put your hands inside your tanks. Let's give it a little shake so all shrimp swim away from that floating plants. And now let's change 10% of water because it's time for changing water here in this tank. Yeah guys, take a look at the amount of the moss we have in this tank. That's a big portion of the moss. So I haven't been cut this moss for many months, maybe 2 months at least, 3 months. So it's same in this tank, so it's time to trim this moss right now. So guys, when I trim this moss, what I do, I just try to peel off a little portions of the moss, and then I try to rinse it in the water to make sure there's no baby shrimps trapped inside the moss. So this process takes some time, and you need to be careful because there should be a lot of shrimps inside this moss, so you need to be very gentle and make sure you not damage the shrimp. So we have a little bit amount of moss left, and what I do, I try to make just a flat surface like this and start shooting upwards in a week or so. And guys, you can see this tank below, I just did it yesterday. I trimmed that moss and I just left a little bit of moss on top of UGF, and it's gonna be growing again within a week or 2. So let's do that tank as well, the next one. Yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of dust in this tank, and the reason for that is that this UGF filter has a lot of dust at the bottom of it. Yeah, let me just show you here. So you can see that, yeah. So it's spitting the dust out from the box, and the moss catches the particles, and this contains a lot of dust inside. So let's wait until the dust settles down a bit and proper look into these tanks. I just touched the filter and I feel it's quite hard inside, and I think it's time to clean it up. So once you remove the filter sponge, it's better to rotate it like that on the surface of the water, and then if any shrimp on top of that, they should come out. Let's give it a bit squash in this water. Yeah, it's quite dusty inside. Yeah, make sure no shrimp inside. So the water should be clear much faster now. And take a look at this moss we have here. Look at this. This is all from 2 tanks, you know. Okay, our water become more clear in these tanks. Yeah, you can see that our moss look a little bit messy right now, but that's only temporary. In 2-3 weeks it's gonna grow back nicely. So another thing what I want to do is to change the soil at the bottom of these tanks, and this soil is called Easter Shrimp Premium soil. You can see it here, and I'm not quite happy about this soil because I have this soil in the 3 tank, in these 2 tanks. And also I had before in this tank before I restarted it. And the reason why I restarted this tank is because my shrimps weren't doing very well and dying, and also I don't see the shrimps breeding a lot. So basically the shrimps are not doing great as well. Maybe coincidence, maybe not, but it's better be safe than sorry, and I want to replace this soil. And I will replace it for the same soil I have here, little grain soil, gray color. And this soil is called Easter shrimp pH 5.5, and this soil has a low pH, and I have great success with this soil everywhere in the tank where I have a soil. And in fact, this filter has half of that soil. You can see it's probably about, to this point, is Easter shrimp and this ADA Amazonia. So the shrimp's doing great, pH is very low, and that's why I want to change this soil at the bottom to the pH 5.5. And you can see here in the bucket, I already cycling this soil for 2 weeks. So as far as I know, the soil doesn't leaking ammonia, but I still decided to cycle it in a little UGF box, you can see here. And now I'm planning to put the soil in our tanks. Let's take it out and put it in this bucket here. I didn't want to put the soil straight to the tanks because I'm not sure if it's safe, because it can leaking some fertilizer, some minerals in a big amount in the beginning. So better to put it in the bucket and cycle for 2 weeks. So now it's time to remove that black soil out from the tank. Luckily, it's not many babies in this tank. There are some babies, but they are already grown, and I have some buried shrimps in this tank. So before they hatch the eggs, so you can see there the red ball shrimp is buried at the back, and then oh, there's 2 buried shrimps together, you see that. So I have some buried shrimps, and before they hatch the eggs, I want to suck this soil, because once they hatch the eggs, and there are going to be a lot of little babies around, and it's going to be very difficult to suck out the soil once the babies are around. So let's do it now. And instead of black bucket, I'm going to use white bucket, and the reason for that, if I suck any shrimps, I'm going to easier find them in the white bucket than the black bucket. And to suck more soil and less water, I'm going to use a small diameter hose, and I already took 10% of water from this tank. Accidentally, I shouldn't have done it, so it's going to be a big water change for this tank this time, but that should be fine. Okay, we sucked most of the soil from this tank. You can see there is no soil at the bottom, and I probably suck a couple of shrimps, and that's why I'm gonna be waiting for 1 day, and tomorrow when the water gonna be more clear, I'm gonna check that bucket, because it's probably I'm probably gonna have few shrimps inside this bucket. So now it's turn to do this tank. Okay, this tank finished as well. You can see there is no soil at the bottom. It looks funny with the shrimps without the soil, yeah. It's okay to keep it like that. I saw some breeders keep the shrimps without the soil. As long as you have soil in the UGF and it's buffering the water, you don't need the soil at the bottom of the tanks. But we're gonna put this soil, which hopefully gonna give us a better result, and the shrimps start to breed and thrive again, I hope. Guys, just want to tell you that when you put your UGF boxes, try to leave a reasonable gap so the shrimp can come through that gap. Otherwise, if you leave a little gap, your babies might go inside, and some juvenile shrimps might stuck inside as well. I noticed that before, when I left a small gap only between the UGF and the glass, I noticed that some shrimps might stuck, you know, because the glass is quite slippery for the shrimp. I lost one buried shrimp because she just basically stuck and spent like a whole day inside, and then she died at the end. So make sure you leave a little gap here between UGF and the glass. Okay, it's time to put this soil into the tanks, and I'm gonna use this jack to do that. Okay, our shrimp is happy with this new soil, and I'm happy as well to change it. And fingers crossed it's going to be more successful with this soil, and I hope that was the issue why the shrimps not breeding and not thriving, is because was that soil. And now it's time to fill the tanks back with the fresh water. And while I was doing water change, I also cut this Specie dense moss on coconut shell, and shrimps going absolutely crazy about that. They love it because they can get access to the bottom layer, which was difficult to access before. So now I'm gonna flood this soil a bit and then we get back to these tanks tomorrow and see how our shrimp's doing. It is next day now, guys, and the water became crystal clear and the shrimps looking fantastic. They're very happy, very active. I haven't seen any dead shrimps, so very happy with the result. And I knew that I actually have a few shrimps in that bucket which I sucked yesterday, so I'm gonna return them in the tanks. And guys, take a look at this filter. It's almost full with the waste at the bottom, and it's really difficult to clean it because that when you put the tubing, it's very difficult to bend it, and there's lots of pins inside, and basically you only can suck the waste out from the corner of the filter, and you wouldn't be able to suck it from the front. And it's actually remind me one Japanese breeder which I learned a lot from, and he actually has a few tanks with underground filter which covering the bottom of the tanks, and he deliberately made a path for shrimps to get inside the UGF filter. Some baby shrimp can get inside, then grow up, and then create another colony. So he has like a 2 colony of shrimps, and one of them live overground and another underground, and both of them thrive and breed. So basically he using his own shrimps to clean up his filter. But then he actually came up with a very clever idea. He made a tube and installed it inside UGF filter. And with this tube he can actually clean up the filters by sucking out the dirt. I don't think it's doable in these little underground filter boxes. But anyway guys, if you're up to UGF filters, I really highly recommend to check his video out. I learned a lot from this guy, and I will leave a link to his channel in my description box.